My name is Elena Rodriguez, and the moment I saw my mother step into the church wearing a floor-length white lace gown, I knew my wedding day was about to become a battlefield. She stood in the entrance, backlit by the afternoon sun, looking like a bride herself in that ivory masterpiece with its delicate beading and flowing train. My bridesmaids gasped. My future mother-in-law's face went pale. But what my mother didn't know, what none of my family knew as they whispered and stared, was that sitting in the third pew was Marcus Chen, CEO of Titanium Ventures, the man who had just signed a $94 million deal with my company. And in exactly 2 hours, he would stand up during the reception and say words that would change everything my family thought they knew about me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the youngest of 3 children in the Rodriguez family of Chicago meant living in the shadow of extraordinary achievement. Our brownstone in Lincoln Park was more museum than home, every surface carefully curated to reflect success and taste. My father, Ricardo Rodriguez, had built a commercial real estate empire from nothing, transforming abandoned warehouses into luxury condominiums and turning blighted neighborhoods into thriving communities. His name appeared regularly in the Chicago Tribune's business section, usually accompanied by photos of him shaking hands with mayors and governors. My mother, Patricia, had her own claim to fame as a former beauty queen turned socialite and philanthropist. She chaired the board of the Chicago Arts Foundation, hosted fundraising galas that raised millions for children's hospitals, and maintained a social calendar that would exhaust most people half her age. Even at 58, she was stunning, with the kind of bone structure that photographers loved and the poise of someone who had spent her entire life being admired. My older sister, Isabella, had followed directly in our mother's footsteps. She married a venture capitalist at 23, produced 2 beautiful children by 26, and now spent her days organizing charity luncheons and appearing in the society pages. Her house in Winnetka was featured in Architectural Digest. Her children attended the most exclusive private schools. She was everything our mother had groomed her to be, the perfect continuation of the Rodriguez social legacy. My brother, Miguel, took after our father in every possible way. He joined the family real estate business straight out of Northwestern, quickly proving himself as shrewd and ambitious as Dad. By 30, he had closed deals worth hundreds of millions. By 32, he was being groomed to take over the entire company. Family dinners inevitably revolved around Miguel's latest acquisition or development project, with our father beaming as he discussed profit margins and market trends. Then there was me, Elena, the baby of the family, the one who had somehow failed to absorb the Rodriguez ambition gene, or so everyone believed. While Isabella was learning which fork to use at formal dinners, I was in my room building websites on our family computer. While Miguel was shadowing Dad at construction sites, I was teaching myself to code. My parents tolerated these interests the way you might tolerate a child's imaginary friend, something cute that would eventually be outgrown. The real fracture began during my junior year of high school when I won a regional coding competition. I was ecstatic, rushing home with my trophy and certificate, eager to share my achievement. My father glanced up from his Wall Street Journal long enough to say, "That's nice, honey," before returning to the stock prices. My mother, preparing for one of her charity galas, reminded me that I needed to focus on things that would actually matter for college applications, like my volunteer work at the hospital or my position on the student council. When I tried to explain that coding competitions were impressive to colleges, especially for computer science programs, my mother's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. Computer science? Darling, that's not really appropriate for someone of your background. You should be thinking about communications, perhaps, or art history. Something that will prepare you for the kind of life you'll lead. But I didn't want the kind of life she envisioned for me. I didn't want to marry someone from the right family, host the right parties, wear the right clothes. I wanted to build things, to solve problems, to create something that mattered beyond social circles and charity boards. When college application time came, I applied to MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and Stanford, schools known for their technology programs. I also applied to Northwestern and University of Chicago to keep my parents happy, letting them assume I would major in something they deemed acceptable. My acceptance to MIT's computer science program should have been a moment of celebration. Instead, it triggered the first major family crisis. We were at Sunday dinner, the weekly ritual where the entire family gathered at my parents' home. I had just received my acceptance letter that morning and couldn't contain my excitement. MIT accepted me into their computer science program, I announced, setting down my water glass with a trembling hand. Can you believe it? One of the best tech schools in the world. The silence that fell over the dining room was deafening. My father set down his fork with deliberate care. MIT? In Boston? That's quite far from Chicago, Elena. And computer science? I thought you were considering communications at Northwestern. Isabella exchanged a meaningful glance with our mother, the kind of silent communication they perfected over years of social events where appropriate reactions were everything. My mother's voice, when she spoke, had that particular tone she used when correcting bad behavior at charity functions. Elena, sweetheart, I think we need to discuss this more carefully. Computer science isn't really a field for young women of your social standing. It's so technical, so isolated. How will you meet the right kind of people? How will you maintain the connections that matter? I felt something inside me harden. The right kind of people? Mom, MIT is full of brilliant minds, innovators, people who are changing the world. That's the kind of people I want to meet. Not just people with the right last names or the right bank accounts. Miguel snorted into his wine glass. Changing the world? Elena, that's naive. The world runs on money and connections, not code. Dad built his empire on relationships, not sitting alone in front of a computer screen. The argument escalated from there, with my father explaining that computer work was something you hired people to do, not something you did yourself. My mother worried about my marriage prospects, about how I would fit into Chicago society if I spent my formative years in Boston surrounded by nerds and geeks. Isabella, ever the peacemaker, suggested I could always do computer stuff as a hobby while pursuing a more suitable career. But I was stubborn, a Rodriguez trait even if I applied it differently than my siblings. I accepted MIT's offer. My parents, to their credit, didn't cut me off financially, though my mother made pointed comments about wasting opportunities. The morning I left for Boston, she hugged me at the airport with tears in her eyes, whispering that it wasn't too late to transfer to Northwestern after a semester, that I could still have a normal life. College became my sanctuary. At MIT, my obsession with technology wasn't weird, it was celebrated. My ability to see patterns in code, to solve complex problems, to build elegant solutions was valued. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised even me. While my roommates went to parties, I was in the computer lab. While others slept, I was debugging code and learning new programming languages. But I also discovered something unexpected. I had a gift for understanding what people needed before they knew they needed it. In my software engineering classes, while other students focused purely on the technical aspects, I asked questions about user experience, about business applications, about how the code we wrote would actually be used in the real world. One of my professors, Dr. Sarah Kim, pulled me aside after class one day during my sophomore year. "You have an unusual combination of skills, Elena," she said, her keen eyes studying me over her glasses. "Most engineers are brilliant at the technical work but struggle to communicate with non-technical people. You seem to bridge that gap naturally. Have you considered product management? It's where technology meets business strategy." I hadn't considered it, but her words planted a seed. I started taking business classes alongside my computer science coursework, studying how successful tech companies operated, how products were developed and marketed, how technical innovation translated into business value. My family, when I mentioned this during our weekly phone calls, seemed relieved. "Oh good," my mother said, "you're finally seeing sense and thinking about business. Maybe you'll come work for your father after all." But that wasn't what I had in mind. I wasn't interested in real estate or the traditional business world my family understood. I was fascinated by the explosive growth of technology startups, by the way a good idea and solid execution could create something from nothing. During my junior year, I interned at a small startup in Cambridge that was developing educational software. The company had brilliant engineers but no clear product strategy. I spent that summer helping them refine their vision, talking to potential customers, translating technical capabilities into features that schools actually wanted. The company's founder, a MIT PhD dropout named Jason, was impressed enough to offer me a full-time position after graduation. "Elena, you have something special," he told me on my last day of the internship. "You understand both the tech and the business side. That's rare. Most people are good at one or the other, but you see how they intersect. When you graduate, come back. We'll figure out a role that makes sense." My senior year flew by in a blur of classes, projects, and job offers. When graduation approached, my parents assumed I would return to Chicago and join the family business in some capacity. My father even mentioned creating a new position for me, something involving digital marketing or website management for his properties. My mother planned a graduation party that was really a coming-out event, reintroducing me to Chicago society after my years away. I went home for graduation weekend, bringing my diploma and a secret I hadn't yet shared. At the celebration dinner, surrounded by family friends and business associates, my father made a toast. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. To Elena, who has finally finished her computer phase and is ready to rejoin the family. "We've missed you, Mija. Welcome home." Everyone applauded. My mother beamed. Isabella hugged me and whispered about setting me up with some of her husband's colleagues, nice young men from good families. I waited until the guests had left and only family remained to drop my bombshell. "I'm not moving back to Chicago," I said quietly, setting down my champagne glass. "I've accepted a position as an associate product manager at a tech startup in Boston. The company is doing incredible work in educational software, and they've offered me equity along with my salary." The reaction was immediate and explosive. My father's face darkened with anger. "After everything we've invested in your education, you're going to work for some startup that will probably fail within a year? Elena, I've been building my business for 30 years. I'm offering you a real position with real stability." My mother looked genuinely distressed. "Boston? But darling, all your friends are here. Your family is here. How will you ever meet someone suitable if you're living across the country?" The argument raged for hours, following the same patterns as before. My family couldn't understand why I would choose uncertainty over the security of the family business. They couldn't see the appeal of building something new, of being part of a team creating products that could change how children learned. To them, my choice looked like rejection, like throwing away every advantage they had given me. Miguel, surprisingly, was the one who tried to find middle ground. "Look, Elena, I get wanting to do your own thing. But a startup? The failure rate is insane. Why not work for an established tech company, something with stability? At least then you'd have a recognizable name on your resume when the adventure phase is over." But I didn't want stability or a recognizable name. I wanted to build something meaningful. I moved to Boston 2 weeks later, taking only what fit in my car, leaving behind the life my family had planned for me. The first 2 years at the startup were brutal. We worked 80-hour weeks in a cramped office above a Thai restaurant. Half the time we weren't sure if we'd make payroll. But we were building something real, something that teachers and students actually loved. My role evolved from associate product manager to head of product as the company grew. I learned to manage teams, to pitch to investors, to make impossible decisions about features and priorities. My family's interest in my work ranged from minimal to non-existent. During our weekly phone calls, my mother would quickly change the subject when I mentioned anything about my job, steering the conversation to Isabella's charity work or Miguel's latest real estate deal. My father would ask pointed questions about when I was coming home, when I was going to give up this experiment and join the real world. Family gatherings became exercises in polite fiction, where I smiled and nodded while everyone discussed their important work and I remained the family eccentric pursuing her little hobby. The startup eventually sold to a larger educational technology company for a sum that made my equity stake worth actual money. Not enough to retire, but enough to prove that this hadn't been a foolish gamble. I mentioned the acquisition to my father during one of our calls, thinking he might finally see value in what I'd been doing. That's nice, Mija, he said absently. Now that you have some money saved, maybe it's time to think about coming home and settling down. Your mother knows several nice young men who would be good matches. I realized then that it didn't matter what I achieved, my family would always see my career as temporary, as something I was doing until I came to my senses and embraced the life they had planned for me. So I stopped trying to make them understand. When the acquisition was complete and I was deciding on my next move, I didn't consult them. I didn't ask for advice or share my options. I simply accepted a position as senior product director at a venture-backed startup called Nexus Solutions, a company developing artificial intelligence tools for small businesses. For the next 3 years, I poured everything into Nexus. The founders, two brilliant engineers named Priya and David, had the technical vision but needed someone who could translate their innovation into products that actual businesses would pay for. That became my specialty, taking complex AI capabilities and packaging them into intuitive, valuable tools that solved real problems for real companies. We started with accounting automation, then expanded into customer service, then inventory management. The work was consuming in the best possible way. I traveled constantly, meeting with potential customers, understanding their pain points, refining our products based on real-world feedback. I built and managed a product team that grew from 3 people to 30. I learned to pitch to venture capitalists, to negotiate with enterprise customers, to make strategic decisions that affected the entire company's direction. My equity stake grew with each funding round, though I never mentioned this to my family. To them, I was still Elena the computer girl, doing something technical they didn't understand and probably never would. Family gatherings became increasingly awkward as the gap between my life and theirs widened. Isabella would discuss her children's private school applications and her latest interior design project. Miguel would share stories about his newest development deal, some luxury condo building or office complex. My mother would detail her charity galas and society events. And I would sit quietly, contributing little, because the moment I mentioned anything about my work, eyes would glaze over or someone would change the subject. Once, during Thanksgiving dinner, I made the mistake of mentioning that Nexus had just closed a significant round of funding from a top-tier venture capital firm. My father nodded politely and immediately turned to Miguel to discuss interest rates and their impact on real estate. The hurt became a dull ache I learned to live with. I dated occasionally, mostly other people in tech who understood the demands of startup life. Nothing serious, nothing that I bothered to mention to my family since any relationship I shared would inevitably lead to questions about marriage and settling down and when I was finally going to grow up and live a normal life. Then I met Daniel Carter at a tech conference in San Francisco. He was a software architect at a competing company, brilliant and funny and completely unpretentious despite his impressive credentials. We bonded over terrible conference coffee and shared frustrations about translating technical capabilities into business value. By the end of the conference, we'd exchanged numbers. 3 months later, we were dating seriously. 6 months after that, he proposed. Daniel was everything my family should have loved in theory: successful, educated, from a good family. His father was a surgeon, his mother a professor. But he worked in technology, which automatically made him suspect in my family's eyes. When I called to tell my parents about our engagement, my mother's first question was, "What does his family do?" Her second was, "When will you move back to Chicago?" The assumption that my engagement meant an end to my career was stated so matter-of-factly that I almost didn't know how to respond. "We're staying in Boston," I said firmly. "We both have careers here. Daniel is leading a major project at his company, and I'm in the middle of a crucial product launch." My mother's disappointed sigh came through clearly over the phone. "Elena, surely now that you're getting married, you can step back from all that work. Daniel can support you. You can finally focus on starting a family, on building a real life." The conversation devolved predictably from there, with my mother suggesting I could find volunteer work in Boston if I really needed to keep busy, and my father offering once again to create a position for me in Chicago if we would just move home. Neither of them seemed to grasp that my career wasn't a hobby or a phase, it was my identity, my passion, my contribution to the world. Planning the wedding became another battlefield. My mother wanted to plan everything from Chicago, envisioning a massive society event with 500 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I wanted something smaller, more intimate, focused on the people who actually mattered to Daniel and me. The compromise we reached satisfied no one, a medium-sized wedding in Chicago to appease my family, but with Daniel and me maintaining control over the actual planning and guest list. The one thing I insisted on, the one absolute non-negotiable, was that I was not leaving my job. Nexus was in the middle of our biggest product launch ever, rolling out an AI-powered business intelligence platform that had taken 2 years to develop. I was the product lead. The launch was scheduled for 2 weeks after the wedding, and I would be back in Boston running the entire operation. My mother found this incomprehensible. "You're going to work right after your honeymoon? Elena, that's not normal. That's not how marriages start. You need to focus on your husband, on setting up your home together." I tried explaining that Daniel understood and supported my career, that we were partners who both had ambitious professional goals. But to my mother, a wife who worked with such intensity wasn't being a proper wife at all. The weeks leading up to the wedding were chaotic. I was managing the product launch preparations while simultaneously dealing with wedding logistics, family drama, and my mother's increasingly elaborate plans. She had opinions about everything from the flower arrangements to the seating chart, most of which seemed designed to showcase the Rodriguez family's social standing rather than celebrate Daniel's and my actual relationship. 3 weeks before the wedding, during what was supposed to be a final planning call, my mother mentioned casually that she'd found the perfect dress. I assumed she meant her mother of the bride dress, so I made encouraging noises without paying much attention. I was in the middle of a product crisis at work, debugging a critical issue with one of our AI algorithms, and only half listening to her description of lace and beading and elegance. It wasn't until my sister Isabella called me the next day that I learned the truth. "Elena," she said, her voice tight with tension, "please tell me Mom didn't actually buy a white dress for your wedding." My hand froze on my keyboard. "What?" Isabella's exhale was long and frustrated. "She showed me pictures yesterday. It's not ivory, it's not cream, it's white. Pure white. With a train. She looks like a bride." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "She can't wear that. Isabella, you have to talk to her. She won't listen to me." There was a long pause. "I tried," Isabella said finally. "I told her it was inappropriate. She said it was the most beautiful dress she'd ever seen and that she couldn't possibly wear anything else to her baby daughter's wedding. She said you'd understand once you saw how elegant it looked." I understood that this was about control, about my mother's need to be the center of attention, about her inability to let me have this one day without making it about her. I called her immediately, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. "Mom, Isabella told me about your dress. You can't wear white to my wedding. You know that's not appropriate." My mother's voice was defensive and wounded in that particular way she had perfected over decades of getting exactly what she wanted. "Elena, don't be so dramatic. It's a beautiful dress, very tasteful. And it's not like you're having a traditional wedding anyway, working right up until the day and planning to go back to work immediately after. The least you can let me do is wear something that makes me feel beautiful." The implication was clear. Since I wasn't being a proper bride, focused solely on the wedding and my future role as a wife, I had forfeited the right to traditional considerations. The argument went nowhere, with my mother insisting the dress was fine and me insisting it absolutely was not. By the time we hung up, nothing was resolved and I had a pounding headache. Daniel found me that evening staring blankly at my laptop, the product specifications I'd been reviewing forgotten. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his bag and coming to sit beside me on the couch. I explained about the white dress, about my mother's refusal to change it, about the deeper issues of respect and boundaries that the dress represented. He listened quietly, his hand warm on my shoulder. "Do you want me to talk to her?" he offered. "Maybe if it comes from me, she'll listen." But I knew she wouldn't. This wasn't really about the dress. It was about my mother's inability to accept who I had become, her disappointment in the life I'd chosen, her need to maintain control and centrality even at my own wedding. The white dress was just the most visible symbol of a dynamic that had been playing out for years. "I'll handle it," I told Daniel, though I had no idea how. Work provided a temporary escape from wedding drama, The product launch was consuming all my energy and most of my sleep. We were in the final testing phase, fixing bugs and refining features based on beta customer feedback. It was stressful and exhausting and exactly what I needed to keep from thinking about my mother's white dress and what it symbolized. 2 weeks before the wedding, something unexpected happened. Marcus Chen, the CEO of Titanium Ventures, reached out directly to schedule a meeting. Titanium was one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the country, known for making early bets on companies that went on to become industry giants. They had been tracking Nexus for months, attending our product demonstrations and asking detailed questions about our technology and market strategy. The meeting, when it happened, was intense. Marcus brought his entire partnership team, 6 incredibly smart and intimidating investors who grilled us for 3 hours about our business model, our technology differentiation, our growth projections. I led the product portion of the presentation, walking them through our AI platform, explaining how we'd solved problems that our competitors hadn't, demonstrating the value we provided to customers. Marcus focused his questions on me specifically. How did you identify these particular pain points? How do you prioritize feature development? What's your vision for where this product goes in the next 5 years? I answered confidently, backed by 3 years of deep customer engagement and strategic thinking. This was my domain, where I was most fully myself. At the end of the meeting, as everyone was packing up, Marcus pulled me aside. That was impressive, Elena. Really impressive. We're going to move forward with a term sheet, and I want you to know that a large part of our confidence comes from the product vision and leadership you've demonstrated. You're building something special here. The deal closed a week before my wedding, a $94 million Series C funding round led by Titanium Ventures. The announcement went out on a Tuesday morning, exactly 5 days before my wedding. Nexus Solutions had secured $94 million in Series C funding led by Titanium Ventures, with Marcus Chen himself joining our board of directors. The tech press covered it extensively. TechCrunch ran a feature about our AI platform and its potential to transform how small businesses operate. Forbes mentioned me by name as one of the key executives driving the company's product vision. My LinkedIn exploded with connection requests and congratulations messages. I was in back-to-back meetings all day, talking to reporters, briefing the team, coordinating with our communications director about the press strategy. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, former classmates, industry contacts. It was exhilarating and overwhelming and left me no time to think about the wedding chaos waiting at home. What I didn't do was call my family. Not out of spite, but because I was genuinely too busy and because I had learned years ago that they wouldn't really understand what this meant anyway. To them, tech funding rounds were abstract concepts. Nothing like the tangible real estate deals my father closed or the charity fundraising totals my mother announced at her galas. I figured I'd mention it casually if it came up during the wedding weekend, though I doubted anyone would ask. Wednesday brought more press coverage and a personal call from Marcus Chen. Elena, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. The board met this morning and we've made a decision about the company's leadership structure. Priya and David are brilliant technologists, but we believe Nexus needs a stronger business leadership presence as it scales. We're going to be announcing a new Chief Product Officer position, someone who will oversee all product strategy and development with a board seat and significant equity. My heart sank slightly. A new CPO meant someone above me, probably some veteran executive from a larger tech company who would come in and change everything we'd built. I tried to keep the disappointment out of my voice. I understand. Do you know who you're considering? Marcus laughed, a warm sound that crackled through the phone. Elena, we want you. We've been watching how you work for months now. The way you understand customers, the way you translate technical capabilities into business value, the way you lead your team. You're exactly what this company needs at this stage. We want to offer you the Chief Product Officer position, effective immediately after your wedding. I sat down heavily in my office chair, trying to process what he'd just said. Me? You want me to be CPO? Absolutely. You'd report directly to the CEO, have a board seat, oversee a significantly expanded team as we scale. The compensation package includes a substantial salary increase and additional equity that will vest over 4 years. We're talking about one of the most senior positions in the company, Elena. You've earned it. The rest of the conversation was a blur of details about compensation, responsibilities, timing. We agreed to make the announcement the week after my wedding, once I was back from my honeymoon and could fully focus on the transition. I hung up feeling like I'd been struck by lightning. Chief Product Officer. Board seat. This wasn't just a promotion, it was validation that everything I'd worked for, everything I'd chosen despite my family's disapproval, had been the right path. I called Daniel immediately. He was thrilled, insisting we celebrate with an expensive dinner despite the fact that we were supposed to be saving for the honeymoon. That night, over champagne and oysters, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced in years. My professional life was exactly where I wanted it. My personal life was about to begin a new chapter with someone who truly understood and supported me. Everything was falling into place. Thursday morning I flew to Chicago, leaving Boston and my well-ordered professional life for the chaos of wedding weekend. Daniel was driving out Friday with some of his groomsmen, but I needed to be there early to handle last-minute details and family obligations. My mother picked me up at O'Hare, looking impeccable as always in a cream silk blouse and tailored pants, her highlighted hair perfectly styled. The drive into the city was filled with her commentary on final wedding preparations. The florist had confirmed the arrangements, the caterer had the final headcount, the string quartet had the complete song list. She spoke quickly, nervously, in a way that made me wonder if she was avoiding something. We were almost to my parents' house when I finally asked the question that had been hanging between us for 2 weeks. Mom, about your dress. She stiffened slightly, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. I thought we'd moved past that, Elena. It's a beautiful dress and I'm wearing it. That's final. We haven't moved past it because you're planning to wear white to my wedding. That's not acceptable. My mother pulled into the driveway with more force than necessary, putting the car in park and turning to face me with an expression I'd seen countless times growing up, the one that said she was the parent and I was being unreasonable. Elena, I have been planning events for 30 years. I know what is and isn't appropriate. This dress is elegant and tasteful, and frankly, given that you're having a very non-traditional wedding, working right up until the ceremony and planning to go back to work immediately after, I think you're being hypocritical about tradition. The accusation stung because it was meant to. In my mother's worldview, I had already violated so many traditional expectations of what a bride should be that I had forfeited the right to enforce the ones that remained. If I wasn't going to be a proper bride, completely focused on the wedding and my future role as a wife, then I didn't get to complain about her dress choice. I'm not being hypocritical. I'm having a career and a wedding, which millions of women do every day. And part of having a wedding is being the only person wearing white. That's not some obscure tradition, Mom. That's basic wedding etiquette. She climbed out of the car, effectively ending the conversation. I followed her into the house, feeling the familiar frustration of trying to set boundaries with someone who had never acknowledged I had the right to set them. The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of wedding preparations and family gatherings. The rehearsal dinner was Friday evening at an upscale restaurant my parents had chosen, filled with family friends I barely knew. My father gave a speech about his baby girl finally settling down, with pointed comments about how proud he was that I'd found someone to take care of me. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, understanding without words how those comments landed. Miguel and Isabella were both there with their families, and for a brief moment during cocktail hour, I caught my brother looking at his phone, frowning. He glanced up at me with an odd expression. Hey, Elena, isn't this you? He turned his phone screen toward me, showing a TechCrunch article about the Nexus funding with my photo prominently featured. The caption read, Elena Rodriguez, Director of Product, credited with driving Nexus Solutions' innovative AI platform. Before I could respond, my father appeared at my elbow. What are you looking at? Miguel showed him the phone, and I watched my father's face as he scanned the article. His expression went through several stages: confusion, surprise, and something that might have been recognition that he'd been missing something important. Elena, is this about your company? The $94 million mentioned here? Yes, I said simply. We closed the Series C round on Tuesday. It's been a busy week. My father stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. $94 million? That's not some small startup funding. That's serious money. That's the kind of number that gets attention. I know, Dad. I've been getting attention all week. The tech press has been covering it pretty extensively. Why didn't you tell us? My mother asked, appearing at my father's side. She'd clearly been listening to the conversation. This seems like something you should have mentioned. I considered several responses, most of them more confrontational than the moment required. Because I've been working non-stop and didn't think you'd be interested. You've never been interested in my work before. My mother looked genuinely hurt, though whether by the implicit accusation or by the funding news itself, I couldn't tell. That's not fair, Elena. We've always cared about your work. We just didn't realize it was this significant. The rest of the rehearsal dinner was strange, with my parents and Miguel asking careful questions about Nexus, about my role, about what the funding meant. Isabella mostly stayed quiet, though I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was like they were seeing me for the first time, recalibrating their understanding of who I was and what I'd been doing for the past several years. That night, back at my parents' house in my childhood bedroom, I couldn't sleep. Daniel had texted goodnight from his hotel with his groomsmen, oblivious to the weird family dynamics playing out. I lay awake thinking about the white dress, about my parents' sudden interest in my career, about how tomorrow I would walk down the aisle toward a future I'd built despite, not because of, my family's vision for me. Saturday morning dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect September day that made Chicago stunning. I woke early, my stomach tight with nerves that had nothing to do with marrying Daniel and everything to do with the family dynamics I'd be navigating. The day started with hair and makeup at the hotel where the wedding would take place, a historic venue in the Gold Coast that my mother had chosen. My bridesmaids arrived in shifts, along with Isabella, who was serving as my matron of honor despite the distance that had grown between us over the years. The energy in the bridal suite was strange, charged with something I couldn't quite name. My mother flitted in and out, managing last-minute details with her usual efficiency. Each time she appeared, I looked for the white dress, but she was still in her regular clothes, promising she'd change shortly before the ceremony. Elena, the photographer, wants some getting ready shots, she announced around 11. And the florist just delivered your bouquet. It's absolutely stunning. My phone buzzed constantly with work messages that I tried to ignore. My team was in final preparation for the product launch, and even though I'd delegated everything I possibly could, they still had questions. I answered a few critical texts between makeup touch-ups, earning disapproving looks from my mother, who seemed to view my phone usage as further evidence of my failure to be a proper bride. By noon, I was in my wedding dress, an elegant silk gown with delicate beading that felt both traditional and modern. It wasn't the dress my mother would have chosen, she'd wanted something more elaborate, more princess-like, but Daniel and I had agreed it was perfect. My bridesmaids were dressed and ready. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Except for my mother's dress. She still hadn't shown me what she was wearing, claiming she needed to finish her own hair and makeup first. Isabella pulled me aside around 1:30, her face tight with worry. Elena, I saw it. Mom's dress. It's worse than I thought. It's not just white, it's bridal white. Long sleeves, lace, a train. She's going to look like she's the one getting married. My stomach dropped. Isabella, you have to talk to her. Tell her she can't wear it. I tried, Isabella said helplessly. So did Dad. She won't listen. She says it's her choice and she's wearing it. There's nothing we can do at this point without causing a massive scene. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. This was supposed to be my day, the one day where I got to be the center of attention, where the focus was on Daniel and me and our future together. And my mother was about to walk into my wedding looking like a bride herself, unable to let me have even this without making it about her. The photographer knocked on the door. Elena, we need to get the family photos before the ceremony. Your parents are ready. I looked at Isabella, at my bridesmaids, at the beautiful suite that should have been filled with joy and excitement. Instead, I felt the familiar weight of family disappointment and boundary violations that had characterized my entire adult life. When I walked into the hallway where the pre-ceremony photos were being taken, I saw her. My mother stood near the window, and Isabella had been right. The dress was stunning and absolutely inappropriate. Floor-length white lace with a fitted bodice, long sleeves, and a short train that pooled elegantly on the floor behind her. She looked beautiful, elegant, and unmistakably bridal. The photographer's assistant's eyes widened. Several of my bridesmaids gasped audibly. My father stood next to her looking uncomfortable but resigned, clearly having lost whatever private battle he'd fought about the dress. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You can't wear that. You know you can't wear that." My mother turned, her expression a careful mixture of innocence and defiance. "Elena, don't start. Not today. You look beautiful. I look beautiful. Let's just focus on celebrating your marriage." "But we can't focus on my marriage when you're dressed like the bride. Everyone is going to stare. Everyone is going to talk about this." My mother's perfectly made-up face remained calm, but I could see the steel beneath it. "Let them talk. I'm your mother. I'm allowed to look nice at your wedding. After everything your father and I have done for you, after flying in half these guests and paying for this entire event, I think I've earned the right to wear what I want." The implication was clear, since I'd disappointed them with my career choices, with my refusal to live the life they'd planned. The least I could do was let my mother have this. The least I could do was surrender this one tradition, this one boundary, as payment for their ongoing disappointment in who I'd become. Miguel appeared then, taking in the scene with understanding eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "this isn't appropriate. Even I know that. You need to change." My mother's expression hardened. "I'm not changing. Elena can accept this or she can throw a tantrum, but either way, I'm wearing this dress to her wedding." The photographer, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of her, cleared her throat gently. "Perhaps we should start with some photos of just the bride and groom? We can do family photos afterward." I nodded numbly, grateful for the escape. As I turned to find Daniel, I caught Isabella's eye. She looked devastated, whether for me or about her own inability to fix the situation, I couldn't tell. The next hour passed in a surreal haze. Photos with Daniel, who immediately noticed something was wrong but didn't press when I said we'd talk later. Final touch-ups in the bridal suite. My bridesmaids trying to boost my spirits while carefully avoiding mentioning my mother's dress. And underneath it all, a growing anger that I couldn't quite contain. This was supposed to be my day. After years of living up to family expectations only to be dismissed, after building a successful career that my parents couldn't be bothered to understand, after carving out a life on my own terms, I had wanted this one day to be about Daniel and me. Instead, my mother had found a way to center herself, to make a statement about control and disappointment and her inability to let me step fully into my own life. At 1:45, my bridesmaids lined up. The string quartet began playing. Through the closed doors of the bridal suite, I could hear the murmur of guests taking their seats. 200 people, most of whom I barely knew, gathered to witness a wedding that my mother was about to overshadow with her white dress and her desperate need for attention. My father appeared to walk me down the aisle, looking distinguished in his tuxedo but also troubled. "Elena," he started, but I cut him off with a look. "I don't want to talk about it, Dad. Let's just get through this." As the doors opened and the processional began, I saw my mother take her seat in the front row. Even from a distance, that white dress was unmistakable, glowing in the afternoon light streaming through the venue's tall windows. I heard the gasps, the whispers, saw heads turning and guests exchanging shocked glances. This was the moment everyone would remember from my wedding, not my vows or Daniel's sweet speech or the love we were celebrating, but my mother's white dress and the audacity it represented. But then I saw something else. Sitting in the third row on the groom's side was Marcus Chen, CEO of Titanium Ventures, the man who had just invested $94 million in my company. He'd RSVP'd weeks ago, back when he was just an important potential investor. Now he was my board member, my professional champion, someone who had seen my capabilities and valued them highly enough to bet tens of millions on my vision. Next to him sat two other titanium partners who I recognized from our funding meetings. They were watching the ceremony with interest, probably noticing the same white dress drama that everyone else was noticing, but their presence reminded me of something crucial. I had built something real. I had achieved something significant. And in less than 24 hours, the world would know about my promotion to Chief Product Officer, a role that came with real power and real recognition. My mother could wear whatever dress she wanted. She could make my wedding about herself. But she couldn't diminish what I'd accomplished or who I'd become. The ceremony proceeded beautifully despite the white dress hovering in my peripheral vision. Daniel's vows made me cry. My own vows came from a place of deep certainty about our partnership. When we kissed as the officiant pronounced us married, the applause was genuine and warm. Walking back down the aisle as a married couple, I held Daniel's hand tightly, drawing strength from the life we were building together. The receiving line was awkward, with guest after guest offering congratulations while their eyes flickered to my mother standing nearby in her bridal white. Some people were tactful enough to pretend they didn't notice. Others, particularly Daniel's relatives, looked openly appalled. My mother stood serenely through it all, accepting compliments on her dress with gracious smiles that suggested she saw nothing wrong with her choice. The cocktail hour gave me a brief reprieve. Daniel and I were whisked away for more photos while guests enjoyed drinks and appetizers. The photographer, professional to her core, managed to capture beautiful moments without highlighting the white dress drama. But I couldn't fully relax, knowing that the reception ahead meant more hours of my mother's white dress being the unspoken center of attention. As we made our entrance into the reception, the DJ announced us with enthusiasm. The room applauded. My mother, seated at the parents' table prominently near the front, stood with everyone else, her white dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. I saw guests at nearby tables leaning toward each other, whispering. The gossip was already spreading, the story of the mother who wore white to her daughter's wedding. Dinner was served, toasts were made. My father's toast was brief and focused mostly on Daniel, welcoming him to the Rodriguez family and expressing hopes for our future. Miguel's best man toast was funny and sweet, talking about how Daniel had managed to win over the entire Rodriguez family despite our initial skepticism about Elena's choices. The implication, intentional or not, was that Daniel had somehow redeemed my questionable life decisions. Isabella's matron of honor toast was more emotional, talking about sisterhood and growth and finding your own path. She didn't mention my mother's dress, but her eyes kept drifting to it, and I knew she was thinking about the statement it made, the boundaries it violated, the family dynamic it revealed. As dinner plates were being cleared, I saw Marcus Chen stand and make his way toward the head table. My stomach tightened. I hadn't told my family that one of the country's most prominent venture capitalists was at my wedding. I hadn't mentioned his presence or his significance. In the chaos of the white dress drama, it hadn't seemed important. Marcus approached with the confident ease of someone used to commanding rooms. Elena, Daniel, congratulations. Everything has been lovely. He shook Daniel's hand, then turned to me with a warm smile. I wanted to let you know that we're planning to make the CPO announcement on Tuesday as discussed. The board is incredibly excited about your expanded role. The words hung in the air. Chief Product Officer. Board. Expanded role. I saw my parents' heads snap up from their table a few feet away. My father's expression shifted from polite interest to sharp attention. Miguel, sitting nearby, stopped mid-conversation with his wife. Before I could respond, Marcus continued, seemingly oblivious to the family dynamics he'd just detonated. You've built something remarkable at Nexus, Elena. Your product vision, your leadership, the way you've scaled the team. The board unanimously agreed you're exactly what we need in this next phase of growth. Having you as CPO gives us tremendous confidence in the company's direction. My mother appeared at my elbow then, her white dress rustling as she moved. I'm Patricia Rodriguez, Elena's mother, she said, extending her hand to Marcus with the gracious smile she used at her charity galas. You seem to know my daughter quite well. Marcus shook her hand, his expression professional but warm. Marcus Chen, CEO of Titanium Ventures. We just led Nexus Solutions Series C funding round. $94 million. Elena here is a big part of why we made that investment. Her product leadership is exceptional. I watched my mother's face as she processed this information. The CEO of a major venture capital firm. $94 million. Product leadership. These were terms she didn't fully understand, but the reverence in Marcus's tone was unmistakable. This wasn't someone humoring an employee at a wedding. This was someone expressing genuine professional respect. Elena is going to be our new chief product officer, Marcus continued, clearly excited about the announcement and unaware of the family minefield he was navigating. She'll be one of the most senior executives in the company, with a board seat and everything. We're lucky to have her. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over our corner of the reception. Chief Product Officer. Board seat. Most senior executives. These were not the words my family associated with their daughter Elena, the computer girl with her little startup hobby. My father stood and approached, extending his hand to Marcus. Ricardo Rodriguez. Elena's father. This is quite a surprise. We weren't aware of this promotion. It's being announced Tuesday, I said quietly. I just found out earlier this week. Between the wedding and everything else, there hasn't been time to discuss it. Marcus, bless him, seemed to recognize that he'd stumbled into something complicated. Well, you should all be very proud. Elena is doing remarkable work. The product she's built is going to transform how small businesses operate. She's got a rare combination of technical understanding and business acumen. We're expecting great things from her leadership. One of the Titanium partners who had come to the wedding approached then, introducing herself to my parents and adding her own praise for my work. The conversation expanded to include several curious guests who had overheard snippets and wanted to know more about this funding and promotion that seemed to have caught everyone by surprise. I stood in the center of it all, still in my wedding dress, watching my family's expressions as they absorbed information about my professional life that they'd never bothered to ask about. My mother's white dress suddenly seemed less important, overshadowed by the revelation that her disappointing daughter was actually a successful executive at a well-funded technology company, important enough that one of the country's top VCs had come to her wedding and was publicly celebrating her promotion. Miguel pulled me aside as the conversation continued around us. Elena, why didn't you tell us about any of this? The funding, the promotion, your actual role at the company? I looked at him, at his genuine confusion, and felt years of frustration bubble up. Would you have listened, Miguel? Would any of you have actually listened if I'd tried to explain what I was building? You've spent years treating my career like a hobby, like something I was doing until I came to my senses and got a real job. That's not fair, he protested, but without much conviction. We didn't understand what you were doing. We didn't understand because you didn't want to understand. I kept my voice low but firm. Every time I tried to share anything about my work, you changed the subject or looked bored. So I stopped trying. I built my career without your support or understanding because that's what I had to do. Miguel looked genuinely chastened. I didn't realize. None of us realized. That's the problem. The reception continued around us, but the energy had shifted entirely. Guests who had been whispering about my mother's white dress were now whispering about the venture capital CEO praising my work and the executive promotion I'd kept secret. My parents found themselves fielding questions from their society friends about my company, my role, what exactly a chief product officer did. I watched my mother's carefully constructed composure crack slightly as she tried to explain a career she'd spent years dismissing. Daniel pulled me onto the dance floor for our first dance as the DJ played the song we'd chosen months ago. As we swayed together, he whispered in my ear that he was proud of me, that watching Marcus publicly validate my work in front of my family had been deeply satisfying. I leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence, for having someone who had always understood what I was building even when my own family couldn't. When the dance ended, my father approached and asked for the traditional father-daughter dance. As we moved across the floor to a Frank Sinatra song my mother had selected, he spoke quietly so only I could hear. I owe you an apology, Elena. Several apologies, actually. I never took the time to understand what you were really accomplishing. I made assumptions based on my own limited view of what success looks like. His words were sincere, but they couldn't erase years of dismissal and disappointment. I appreciate that, Dad. But this isn't something that gets fixed with one apology at my wedding reception. You've spent years making me feel like my choices were wrong, like I was the family disappointment. That doesn't disappear because a venture capitalist showed up and validated what I've been telling you all along. My father nodded slowly, his expression more humble than I'd ever seen it. You're right. We should have listened better. We should have trusted you more. Your mother and I, we thought we knew what was best. We thought we were protecting you from making mistakes. But you weren't making mistakes. You were building something we were too narrow-minded to see. The song ended and we returned to our table where my mother sat alone, her white dress suddenly looking less like a power move and more like a desperate grasp at relevance. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wet with tears she was trying hard to contain. Elena, I need to talk to you. Not here, I said gently. Not now. This is still my wedding, Mom. But she stood anyway, taking my arm and guiding me toward a quiet corner away from the guests. Her white dress trailed behind her, the train catching slightly on chair legs, and I realized with a start that she looked older than I'd thought, more fragile. I wore this dress to get your attention, she said quietly, her voice breaking. I've been trying to get your attention for years, trying to make you see that you were throwing away opportunities, making your life harder than it needed to be. I thought if I did something dramatic, if I made you angry enough, maybe you'd finally listen to what I was trying to tell you. But you weren't trying to tell me anything constructive, Mom. You were trying to control me, to make me into the daughter you wanted instead of accepting the daughter you have. She dabbed at her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. I watched you move across the country and choose a life that seemed so hard, so uncertain. I wanted easier things for you. I wanted you to have the security and social standing that your father and I built. I didn't understand that you were building something different, something meaningful in its own way. Her admission was more than I'd expected, but it still came wrapped in the same conditional acceptance that had always characterized our relationship. She was sorry she hadn't understood, but only because external validation had finally forced her to see value in my choices. Would she have apologized if Marcus Chen hadn't shown up? Would any of them have reconsidered their dismissal of my career if a prestigious venture capitalist hadn't publicly praised my work? I need you to understand something, I said carefully. I didn't choose this career to hurt you or disappoint you. I chose it because it's where I belong, where my skills and passions align. I've been successful by any reasonable measure, building products that help thousands of businesses, leading teams, earning the respect of my colleagues. The fact that you couldn't see that value until someone else pointed it out to you says more about your limitations than mine. My mother flinched at the words but didn't argue. I know that now. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I wore this dress. I thought I was making a statement about tradition and respect, but I was really just being petty and controlling. You deserved better from me today. The apology hung between us, insufficient to heal years of hurt but perhaps enough to start building something new. The DJ announced the cake cutting and we returned to the reception, to Daniel and the celebration that continued despite the family drama. My mother changed into a different dress before the evening ended, a navy blue number she'd apparently brought as a backup. She never explained the switch to the other guests, but her absence of white felt like a small concession, an acknowledgement that she'd crossed a line. The rest of the wedding passed in a blur of dancing and champagne and conversations with guests who now wanted to hear about my work, about Nexus Solutions and artificial intelligence and what it meant to be a chief product officer. Miguel found me during a quiet moment and asked genuine questions about my company, about how I'd built my career, about the challenges of working in technology. Isabella hugged me tight before leaving and whispered that she was proud of me, that watching me stand up for myself had been inspiring. Daniel and I left the reception around 11, exhausted and emotionally drained but also relieved that the day was finally over. In the car service taking us to the hotel where we'd spend our wedding night before flying out for our honeymoon, he took my hand and said that despite everything, despite the white dress and the family drama, it had been a good day. We'd gotten married, which was the point. And my family had finally been forced to see me clearly, which was perhaps an unexpected gift. The honeymoon in Greece was blissful, 2 weeks of sunshine and ancient ruins and not thinking about family dynamics or work responsibilities. But even there, in a beachside taverna on Santorini, I found myself checking my phone and seeing the announcement that had gone out while we were away. Nexus Solutions names Elena Rodriguez as Chief Product Officer. The press coverage was extensive, with articles in all the major tech publications highlighting my rise from product director to C-suite executive, praising the AI platform I'd built, speculating about the company's future under expanded leadership. My phone filled with congratulations messages from colleagues, former classmates, industry contacts. And then, slowly, messages from family members who had clearly seen the news. My father sent a formal note congratulating me and asking if we could schedule a call when I returned to discuss my work in more detail. Miguel texted that he'd like to learn more about what I did, that maybe there were ways our different business worlds could intersect. Even Isabella reached out, sharing that my success had inspired her to think about returning to work herself after years of focusing solely on family and charity obligations. My mother's message came last, simple and direct in a way that felt more honest than anything she'd said at the wedding. "I'm proud of you, Elena. I should have said that years ago. I should have trusted you to know your own path. I'm sorry it took so long to see what was right in front of me." When Daniel and I returned to Boston, tanned and relaxed and ready to start our married life, I had dinner with my parents who flew out specifically to see us. We sat in a restaurant overlooking the harbor and had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. My father asked detailed questions about my work, genuinely trying to understand what I'd built. My mother listened quietly, occasionally asking questions that showed she was really trying to grasp what I did and why it mattered. They apologized again for the white dress, for the years of dismissal, for failing to support my choices. I accepted their apologies but was also clear that rebuilding our relationship would take time and sustained effort, not just words but actual changed behavior. They agreed, promising to do better, to be more open-minded, to trust that I knew what I was doing with my life. Months later, at a family gathering for Thanksgiving, the dynamics had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. My parents asked about my work with genuine interest. Miguel sought my advice on technology investments he was considering. Isabella confided that she was exploring business school programs, inspired by watching me build my career. Even the extended family treated me differently, with respect rather than puzzled concern. My mother never wore white to another family event, a small thing perhaps but symbolic of larger changes in how she approached boundaries and control. She learned to ask about my work, to celebrate my successes, to accept that the life I'd built was valuable even though it looked nothing like the life she'd imagined for me. The white dress became a family story, one we could eventually laugh about as the moment when everything changed, when secrets were exposed and assumptions shattered. I never forgot what it felt like to stand in that church entrance and see my mother in white, that combination of hurt and anger and resignation. But I also never forgot what happened next, how Marcus Chen's presence and words forced my family to confront their narrow view of success, how crisis became catalyst for real change. Sometimes the moments that threaten to ruin everything are actually the moments that save it, breaking open old patterns so new ones can grow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.